they are going to afford to live. And we're talking about these sanctions, and we're talking about people will be saying about get off the dependency of Russian gas and all the rest of it. All of these things are going to be pushing the cost of living further and further up. What should we be doing?
Immediately, the government needs to be providing support to people's bills and to their living circumstances. That can come from getting rid of certain taxes or measures on people's energy bills, say, which I think probably could be then paid for by a windfall tax on the energy companies who are making huge amounts of money from the fact that the energy price has been high before this crisis and has spiked subsequently. And then also probably restoring the £20 uplift on universal credit that we saw in the context of COVID to further help people in the greatest trouble. In some ways, we've got to think about this current moment as another crisis coming upon us in some ways like COVID did, and that requires unprecedented support from the government to support day-to-day families. Into the longer term, I mean, beyond literally days and weeks, we need to continue the process of being less dependent on these crazy gas prices and insulating our homes and moving towards renewable energy and batteries and heat pumps and so on will help in that process. And that's one of the reasons why I agree with the government in wanting to double down on making sure we're no longer dependent on Putin for gas and on crazy international gas prices. And of course we're talking about sanctions earlier, that has a much more direct impact on the Russian state. It's from selling oil and gas that a lot of government revenues come. And the invasion force that's entered into Ukraine and is committing all the things that we're seeing on the TV is partly funded by countries outside of Russia buying oil and gas. So moving away from a dependence in the UK will also help us in this longer run process of reducing Putin's power globally.
Yeah, Chris has just emailed in, by the way. I was just talking about some of the prices of petrol and diesel. Chris says, in my village, Michelle, diesel is £1.79. Goodness me, where on earth do you live, Chrissy? Gareth, I mean, I have to say, Laurie, there's a lot that I want to respond to you on that. In particular, I want to drill down on your concept of a windfall tax. But before you hear from me again, let's bring Gareth in response. What are we going to do about these rising costs?
I liked a lot of what Laurie was suggesting in terms of immediate measures, but from my perspective, this crisis has come about because we've tried to be less dependent on gas, and we can't be. So what that actually means is not that the policy enacted means we don't become less dependent on gas, we become more dependent on the fluctuation of global gas prices. And that's really what's brought this crisis about. And, I think probably everyone is now aware that a very small percentage of British gas comes from Russia. I think it's about 5% or perhaps even less.
It's much broader across Europe, obviously, collectively, but here it's
Indeed. I mean, Germany's in real trouble. 60%, I think, of its supply was coming from Russia. In this country, we could have, if we hadn't put a block on fracking, if we had not stripped out our gas storage supply, we would be in a much, much better position now. And the sort of endless argument that the problem here is that we've just got this addiction to fossil fuels and we need to wean ourselves off it is making the problem worse and worse and worse.